Okay, so let's kick it off. I'm Jean-Pierre Lacroix. I'm president of SLD, and I lead the strategy team here at our company. We specialize in brand transformation, and we spend a lot of time working in the financial industry. And I'm very fortunate today to have with me Marbue Brown, who is author, lecturer, and extremely knowledgeable within the banking industry. Marbue, thank you very much for joining us.
And thank you, Jean-Pierre. I'm really glad to be with you today. Looking forward to us having a really stimulating discussion this afternoon.
Great. And could you explain to the audience a little bit about your background?
Yep. Well, I've actually been in customer experience for quite a while, and I cut my teeth in customer experience mostly in tech. But after that, I went into financial services, and for 4 years, I was head of customer experience for the consumer bank at Chase. Initially, that included also wealth management, but we separated that into a separate business. And I have had that experience in the financial services world, especially during the period of time that we were going through a major branch transformation at Chase. But prior to that, I was at Amazon, where I headed up CX and on-cord and worldwide defect elimination. Prior to that was Microsoft, where I was the leader of the customer experience measurements team. And I've been in the space of customer experience for quite a while, and I, brought that to the financial services industry several years ago.
And Marbue, you just published a new book. You want to talk to us a little bit about your book and what the premise is?
Yes. My book is called Blueprint for Customer Obsession. And, there's a lot of discussion about the whole topic of customer obsession, but everybody's not necessarily speaking the same language. And so what I did in the book was to profile 10 companies that people would not argue much about whether they're customer obsessed or not. And I show how those companies are differentiated from other companies, even companies that are customer centric or customer focused, right? And by the way, in the book, one of the things that we do is to give a continuum, a customer obsession continuum that goes all the way from companies that are customer indifferent to companies that are customer obsessed. Some of the companies that are, profiled in the book include Amazon, Apple, Chewy, Chick-fil-A, Costco, Disney, Ritz-Carlton, Trader Joe's, Southwest, Zappos. So those are, companies that, are in the book. It's designed to help people to understand what differentiates these companies from everybody else and what they can actually do to move the needle in their businesses to get the same kinds of benefits these companies have gotten by, making this a cornerstone of their business strategy.
Great. Yeah, I've been reading your book. There's some great insights, analogies, and some strategies that it's interesting how being customer obsessed is something new, and it really should be fundamental to how financial institutions operate.
Absolutely. It should be fundamental to how financial institutions operate. And, hey, Chase had that on their radar in terms of moving in that direction. And so that was my remit to help jumpstart that journey and accelerate it. Significant strides were made. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you talk about Chase, you look at they've been in the news, them and PNC and Bank of America, where they've are investing billions of dollars in retooling their channel strategy, specifically their branches. There was a lot of doom and gloom about consumers not going to visit branches, branch traffic down. what is driving in your mind this resurgence to the importance of physical branches?
Well, let me say that I think that some of the others that you mentioned, not to, throw shade on anybody, like Bank of America and PNC, are kind of late to the party. When I joined Chase in 2017, that whole notion of, continue to invest in the branches was already underway. And to invest in the transformation of the branches. At that time, I forget whether it was 22 or 23 states, but Chase had locations, physical locations in 22 or 23 states. About a year or so ago, they completed the transition to be physically present in 48 states, right? So, it is a truly national bank. But part of the idea there was they would go ahead and invest in the physical infrastructure. Now, here's the deal. The whole mindset was being able to let customers bank when, where, and how they want, right? And I want you to think about something for a minute. Think about Apple. At the time, all of the but sorry about that. Okay. At the time that all of the gloom and doom around physical locations was going on, and everyone thought that everything would be digital, Apple was investing in the Apple stores, right? And the Apple stores became like a very important part of their strategy, and it's paid off handsomely for Apple, creating deeper connections with their customers. You think of the Genius Bar and all that it does. I don't want to belabor that point, but that's a born digital type of company that invested in their physical space. And then you think of Amazon, another company that's born digital. But the flip side of the story, though, is that company also has invested in having physical locations, whether it's by partnerships with people like Kohl's, where folks can make returns in the Kohl's store or at the UPS store or at even Whole Foods. So the bottom line is that even companies that have been born digital have been thinking about how do we let our customers engage with us when, where, and how they want. And I would say that their success and the Chase success in investing in the physical branches, right, has been part of what has fueled a renewed interest in the physical branch.
Well, it's interesting because we did a study last year on seamless banking that we're going to be sharing after this presentation. And what we found out was, number one, that omni-channel really isn't omni-channel. It's vertical channels that don't talk to each other. And really, there's a huge break between what happens online and mobile and what happens in the branch. It's number one. So it was a huge insight there. And I can see that JP Morgan Chase, it's Bank of America, I've just made a notice that they've consolidated 9 of their apps. But the other big insight, what probably is driving a lot of this movement towards physical branches, is branches remain the growth engine for acquisition of customers, for building stronger relationships. And so I think, based on our study, banks are realizing that that mobile, the digital platform is table stakes now, and that competitive advantage of having a better app than your competition is marginal. But what isn't marginal is when that customer comes into the branch, that recognition, empathy, and personal service is a key driver for growth. Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, that's the other thing that has renewed interest in the physical branches, and that is that, people used to go to the branches primarily to conduct transactions, right? But now, the focus of the branches is shifting from being a transaction center to more of an advice center, right? And that advice can take on a variety of different kinds of approaches, right? So advice can be something as simple as learning how to effectively use my app to do things. When it gets right down to it, some of the people who want to use the apps, they just don't know how. They don't even know what all they can do in the app, right? Many people may not even realize that they can use their app to you know pre pre-start an ATM withdrawal and simply authenticate at the ATM and take money in. A lot of people don't even realize they can do that. A lot of people are apprehensive about depositing checks with the app because, intuitively, maybe it's not obvious to them how something like that should work. So advice can go all the way from getting people comfortable with using, the digital technologies to do transactions, all the way to, planning for specific life events. Whether somebody wants to save for college or somebody wants to save for a house purchase. So there's all of this financial literacy and type of education and those kinds of things. And the branch is the hub where those kinds of things can take place, right? And so you have this whole spectrum of advice, and now the branches are the hubs that are enabling those types of relationships to be made with the customers around the types of advice that they need.
Well, that's really interesting because we did a study last year that led to another study. And the study we did last year was what's driving attrition? Is it customer service? Is it the lack of product selection? Is it the mobile app, or our digital experience isn't up to par? And what we found out was that the gap between competitive set, in other words, the gap between the number one leader in, let's say, mobile online and the lagger, the bottom one, the gap when it comes to customer acceptance is very narrow. Although, GD Powers and other rating companies rate these at different levels, the reality from a customer standpoint, there isn't a lot of difference between them. What we found out was that providing the right advice was a key differentiator and actually a key factor in customer loyalty and attrition. So when you look at, and I think that, I'm sure that financial institutions have discovered that advice is really important in driving customer loyalty. It's something that is, we call it an unmet need. It's something that is not fully available in the marketplace or delivered properly in the marketplace. And so when you look at institutions, and you look at the branch experience, Marbue, how would you change the choreography or the store experience to amplify this kind of level of advice? What were the things you would give as recommendations?
Well, first of all, the folks who work in the branch need to be mobilized around the new mission, right? They need to understand how the branch is transforming and what it's transforming to be, so that they are engaging customers around the whole notion of advice. So that's number one. But the other thing that needs to happen is that the folks in the branches need to be equipped with the tools that enable them to deliver advice, right? And so it may be guides that need to be provided to those folks. It may be training that needs to be provided to them. It may be practices that they need to deploy in the branches so that the folks who are working in the branches will be able to deliver advice. You need to have the physical environment designed so that it facilitates those types of interactions where you have spaces that are set up for advice, and that everything does not revolve around a teller line, for example. You have to have the kinds of practices in the branch that encourage the people who are working in the branch to engage with the customers in different ways. Some of the companies now are essentially adopting an appointment strategy where the customers coming in can set up appointments ahead of time so that people can prepare for them ahead of time. They can have time set aside for them. They come into the branches and those folks are ready to handle not just a transaction, but a meeting with that customer where they can discuss advice-oriented types of things, right? So those are some ways that the branches need to change so that they'll be able to focus on these aspects that are important to the customers.
Yeah, and these changes imply investment, potentially additional cost. And, in our study, 19% of the banks said that they don't put value in their channel, their physical channel, which was very surprising to us. And that some of the challenge in transforming their network is the rising cost of construction, the rising cost of employment. So how would you build a case within your organization for transformation? How would you convince the management that investing in the built environment, the branch environment, is a good investment? What were the things that you would recommend?
Well, look, depending upon the size of the bank, right? Let's just start with the physical spaces. I'll use a different company for a moment, okay? And then I'll come back to financial services or the banks. So Costco, worldwide, all right? 3 million people visit a Costco location in a day. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you that the larger banks have more locations than Costco does. So, they're not necessarily getting the same amount of traffic, but the basic point I'm getting is they're getting a lot of traffic. Let's say you get 500,000 people visiting your branches per day, 200,000 or 300,000 people visiting your branches per day. Now, those people who are going in there, they don't spend 30 seconds in the branch. They spend a lot more. Yet those same companies will pay oodles of money to a network television show for a 30-second spot, right, over the course of a year to influence the thinking of people who are watching a particular program on television. Yet every single day, if they've got 500,000 people in there, if they've got 300,000 or a million or whatever the number is, they have an opportunity to influence those people even more than those commercials would. But if they create wow experiences for those people, those can become viral. So that is an investment all by itself that that rivals other investments that the banks make when they go out there and spend money to invest in these branches. But the other thing you talked about was attrition. Now, look, we can talk about outright attrition, right? But that's not the whole story. There's deposit outflows. Now, if you have stronger and stronger relationships with your customers, you should be looking at inflows instead of outflows. You should be looking at expanded relationships with them, not just around banking, but around wealth management. You should be looking at, not just banking and wealth management, but maybe cards and other, kinds of services. So if you have a whole portfolio of services, you've got, banking and wealth management and, home lending, cards. You should be building your whole portfolio out with the customers that you have. And that's the value of having a branch and being able to make these connections with customers on a lasting basis. You can actually shop in your own closet, if you will, and gain more business by not necessarily going out there and acquiring new customers, but by, making tighter connections and expanding your portfolio with your existing customers. And that will be done through human interaction.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, we often get asked, what should I get in return? What's the ROI of renovating a branch? And we often ask, well, how do you track it today? And most surprising is most financial institutions we speak to do not track ROI. They don't track the investment, the return on investment. They say there are too many factors. And so we went out and we interviewed 400 banking executives to get a sense of the impact. And then we validated our findings with actual bankers who do track performance. Mm-hmm. What was interesting is that financial institutions who renovate their branches, who transform their customer experience, see net on average between 15 and 25% growth in their business. Mm-hmm. And then we asked, why would you see that growth? And they said, you're making a message to the customer that we're going to stay in this community, that we're here to stay. Number one. Number two is that it creates pride and affirmation that the employees are important in that equation. How do you build loyalty with the customer if the staff feel that they're being neglected, that the environment is negative, that it's not productive to engaging with customers? And so all those factors play a really important role in driving growth because it supports the behaviors that you want customers to have, but also the employees. And so on average, we're seeing about a 15 to 25% lift in performance in those branches. But there's also a lot of discussion about branch closures. As financial institutions relocate their branches, they're closing in older markets, opening up smaller footprint branches in new markets. And that's disrupting the marketplace. We noted that 37% of consumers, part of our study, indicated that their branch had either gone through a renovation or a closure or relocation. And those who were where the branch was closed and there wasn't a convenient location left the financial institution. Mm-hmm. So there's a big concern as these institutions retool their channel that there's it's not just silent attrition, it's massive attrition. So what would you advise financial institutions who are looking at right sizing their channel?
Well, let me start off by saying that anytime you have something like a closure or a relocation or downsizing or anything along those lines, that is a prime time that's a trigger, for attrition, because it's the time that person's or that family is going to reevaluate their relationship with the bank. They may not have been thinking about reevaluating their relationship with the bank, but that, of course, will trigger a reevaluation with the bank. Look, every bank needs to have a playbook around those types of events because of the very point that I said, that it's a trigger. Now, that playbook needs to take into account all of the existing traffic that uses, whether it's folks who frequent it, or folks who come there occasionally but regularly, right? They need to the playbook needs to take into account all of those folks, and then you need to essentially almost like simulate or war game it as to if we make these changes, what's going to happen? Because often there are unintended consequences of making change, right? And I think sometimes, like when folks are making these moves, they're playing checkers and they're not playing chess, right? They're not thinking 3, 4, 5 moves down. They're just thinking about the next move. And so all of the parameters that are involved are not necessarily considered, but that's what it's got to be. There's got to be a lot of over communication of what's about to happen. That has to happen with the folks who are working in the branch, as well as with the folks who use the branch, anyone who calls that branch home, right? Or their second home, if you will, right? There has to be a lot of communication with folks ahead of time about what's about to happen, but also to give them the sense that we thought about how this change is going to affect you. And these are the ways that we can minimize any impacts to you, right? And so with that type of communication, and everybody who's working in the branch needs to be able to communicate what's going on with the customers. And they also need to be able, to understand their part in it and articulate it. So communication is a big part. Making sure that you understand all the unintended consequences, that's got to be a big part. Prepping customers so that they know how things are going to change for them, how you're planning to minimize the impact. All of those things have to come into play whenever that change has been being made. Because as smooth as you can make it, okay, that will limit that customer's need or even reason to reconsider their relationship. So yeah. And I mean, it could be simple things as, is the new place going to have enough parking? Okay. It can be like some very, very simple kinds of things that can make huge differences.
Well, it's interesting because we often ask, what is your playbook for relocations and closures? And there isn't actually a lot of attention given to that. So having a playbook, I think Marbue is a great idea, and having it fully flushed out to that. I like the chess versus checkers analogy, looking at the 5 steps removed. What does this mean from a digital transformation standpoint? Parking, customer service, training, and even safety deposit box. We were having this conversation just yesterday with you on, there's a lot of discussion about safety deposit boxes. As branches downsize, there's a lot of pressure to eliminate safety deposit boxes. What's your take on that? Is there value in keeping safety deposit boxes, or do you see that this is something that's going to go away?
Well, look, I think every institution and every branch needs to know their clientele and needs to know their surrounding areas. This is what makes when you think of the community bank, okay, it's because of those connections and those bonds. Now, look, there are certain populations, ethnic groups that have a propensity to use safety deposit boxes. If you're the community bank, you're the community branch in that area, and that's your demographic, you need to be thinking about keeping your safety deposit boxes because people count on it and they expect it to be there for them. And if you don't have it, they will probably go to somebody else who does. But again, I think that you need to understand what your demographics are. If you're in a university environment, the clientele is going to have different needs than if you're in, a bedroom community. Then it's going to have a different need than if you're in the heart of a big metropolitan city. And so you need to make sure that you're accounting, for your demographics and in that the needs of the branch are tailored to those scenarios. So safety deposit boxes are one thing, but you can think of a variety of other types of scenarios that there's some things that you may want to have in some branches that other branches will have no use for, right? Because people are not going to go there on a Friday evening to take jewelry out of their safety deposit boxes for weekend functions, if you will. Whereas in other communities, you're going to see that.
Yeah. And we do a lot of consulting work globally, and we do a lot of consulting work in Europe, and Europe is much further ahead on the transactional shift towards ATMs. I mean, on average, 87% of transactions in Europe are done at ATMs, which kind of frees up the staff to better engage with customers on the advice and sales side of the equation. Whereas in North America, I think we're at around 45 or 47%. So about halfway where Europe is. So when you think of ATMs, are there strategies or things that as we look in the future, that we would is it sales choreography? It's the location of the ATMs. What would be your recommendation there to help make that transition of separating transactions versus advice?
Well, let me start off by saying that there are various reasons why people may be apprehensive to use ATMs for certain things. This is where that whole notion of, coaching, right? First of all, people don't know all the things that they can do in the ATMs. Secondly, they may not be aware of whether the policies at the ATM and the policies at a transaction window are the same. Like for example, funds availability. If I deposit a check in the ATM, does it have the same funds availability, timeline as if I deposit that at a transaction window? Can I deposit the same amounts at an ATM as I can deposit at a transaction window, right? Are there certain types of things that I can't deposit in an ATM? Coins, for example, versus a transaction window. So this is where when you start talking, because I think of ATM as a channel, right? So when you were talking about omni-channel and you were talking about some of the disconnects between the channels, I think of ATM as a channel. So how do the policies of that ATM channel align with the policies of the transaction window or another channel, right? These are some of the kinds of things that create hesitancy around using ATMs. But let me tell you, I mean, this might almost sound, I don't know, counterintuitive, but it might make sense sometimes to have people, do almost like a side-by-side coaching with people on ATMs and what all they can do there. Because look, a lot of times people are unaware of how far they can go. Can I get a cashier's check at an ATM? Like there's just like, can I do a wire transfer at an ATM? Some people don't even know they can do wire transfers in their apps, right? So there's a lot of stuff here, that maybe we almost take for granted. We think that people should know. And hey, listen, if your population is primarily born digital, okay, Gen Zs, whoever, they might just figure these things out on their own. But when you have a mix of your population, sometimes it's not that the mix in the population is not interested. It's that they haven't been coached to get, comfortable with the new way of doing things, with the new technology. Once they are, those very same people who are always coming in to do certain things may not, want to go do that physically. They might be doing it in other ways. But let me say this, if that's the case, don't forget about them. Okay. I let me just throw out this, like sometimes they tell people in marriages, make sure you have date night, you got to keep the fire going. Okay. When you're a bank, you got to keep the fire going. All right. You got to have date night with your customer. Okay. So, because for real, there's a lot of customers that they just park stuff there and they forget about it and you forget about them. But if you want to maintain a connection with those customers, you got to have date night. Okay. So, yeah.
Well, that's great analogy. So when you look at, and we talk about this kind of shift from, how do you shift from transaction to advice? Because a lot of the branch network is set up for transactions, looking for funds, deposits, which fuels easy money for the banks to reinvest. We understand that, but as they shift from that mindset to an advice mindset, which is much more long term, what are, and I'll just throw out one. When we asked in Europe, we asked the banks, well, how did you make this transition from 40% ATM transactions to 87% ATM transactions? What did you do that allowed you to achieve those numbers? And they said, number one is we had the, and I think, Marbue, you talked about that, we had to redefine the purpose of the branch and gain alignment internally with the employees on what that purpose is. Number two is that we need to educate our employees that digital banking, mobile banking wasn't a threat to their jobs, that it actually was an enabler for them to do better, to better engage with their customers on the things that were more relevant, that brought value to them, which is the advice side, the sales side of the relationship. And then they also built in remuneration and recognition for those branches that move those customers to mobile and digital, where a lot of those new transactions were happening in a digital world versus that physical world, that branch was still being recognized and that employee was still being recognized for that sale or that relationship. And once they harnessed those behavioral changes and I'll call it the infrastructure that you talk about, the ATM connecting in the rules of the ATM, which makes a lot of sense, they were able to pivot that mindset and get that traction. So when you think of that shift from transaction to advice, and you think of the North American market, what are the things that you would recommend financial institutions should be doing to drive that shift?
Well, let me say this. Let me start off by saying that advice is not necessarily always a much longer term thing. Okay. I was listening to a football player once talking about how his mother taught him about money management. And one of the things that he said his mother always used to do was something called the holiday club. And she would start at the beginning of the year and she would put a certain amount of money aside every week. And that would be the money that she would use to buy Christmas gifts for them when Christmas rolled around, right? And so she practiced that habit of saving up. So when Christmas came around, she knew how she was going to pay for the things that she was going to buy for Christmas. And he said, look, some years she was able to save more and some years she was able to save less. That depended on, how big the Christmas gifts were that they were going to get. Well, just actually coaching, customers how to do that type of saving. And some apps have been designed to enable people to set aside, like different, parts of their account that say, hey, this amount is going towards my vacation and this amount is going towards, my next car or this amount. So some of those things are not all of that, all that long term. That's so I think that's one of the things that we can help folks to understand that there are these life moments, these milestones in their lives, and the folks in the branches can work with folks to get them to do that. And I guarantee you, if people are saving for things and they get to those milestones, they celebrate and the people in the branch celebrate with them. Let me tell you, that will energize people in the branch to see that they're making a difference in somebody's life, right? That's a huge deal. So that's one aspect of what needs to happen for people to understand something's different is going on here, but it's better and it's something that's going to make a difference in my life. It's going to make a difference in the lives of the people that I'm serving. But I can't, emphasize this enough that people need to be coached into the transition. All right. I think that most of us, even those of us who are tech savvy, underuse the capabilities that we have with our digital tools. And we underuse the capabilities because we don't know what all they are, right? Like I was saying, pre-setting up a ATM transaction before I ever get to the ATM. So all I have to do is authenticate. Many people don't even know that, they can use near field communications to just use their phone, authenticate at the ATM, and do their transactions. I mean, there's so many of these things that people just don't know. And so people need to be coached into that transition. And if every time somebody does a transaction, they can have a tip or two about how they can, make this transition, it would be super helpful to them. If they can get a tip or two that helps them to understand, guess what? We've aligned the funds availability policies. So whether you do the transaction in the ATM or you do it out a window, all right, your funds are going to be available to you at the same time. Can you find out the same information from the ATM that you can find out from the window? These are the kinds of things that are gonna, make people more comfortable. And then there may be some other things that are involved too. Some banks have put in their ATMs and have like extra features where if somebody's having a challenge or something like that at an ATM, they can actually engage a live person for on the fly to be able to help them with it or to ask a question. So some of those kinds of things I think would facilitate the transition. But I think that there's two sides to this. One is for people, the employees and the customers, to experience the value of the advice side of the equation, so that they will value utilizing their time on that more than utilizing their time on transactions, and having that side by side coaching to help people make the move. I think those things will be super helpful to accelerating this transition.
So when I look at some of the advice you provide us with as part of this session, number one is, make sure that the relationship is seamless, so look at the back end infrastructure to allow people who are online or mobile to complete those transactions in the branch, and that they don't have to repeat those, that is truly seamless. And I think that's a great piece of advice. The other one is, invest in your people to train them, give them the guidance required to make that shift from transaction to advice. I think that that's a really important point. The other one you said at the beginning of the session is clearly define purpose. That as the branch role shifts, that shift needs to be reinforced into what is the purpose of the people working in the branch, and to clearly define that purpose in a way that's emotional with them, so that they can get fully embrace the change and support the change, and not fight or resist that move, which any change involves risk, and there's always reluctance to make that change. The other thought you had was this idea of the branch should reflect the demographics of that trading area, and to build those services and products specifically around the demographics. So safety deposit box, ATMs, drive-throughs, the amount of parking, those are all driven by what are the demographics of that trading area, and that the branch should be a microcosm of that trading area and reflect those demographics. And then you also talked about relocation. One of the things that financial institutions should be considering is a playbook. A relocation transformation playbook that is very deep, that is, as you say, it's chess, not checkers. It's 5 steps deep. It looks at holistically the implication across all of the channels, not just the branch. And it touches on people, technology, and the physical aspects. I think those are really great insights, Marbue. When you start looking now at the future, let's look 5 years out. All of these chess pieces have been played out. Where do you see the future of the branches? If I look now, 2020, there was 14,000 financial institutions. We're down to 4,000 today, and they're predicting with consolidation in the marketplace. We saw our U.S. Bank acquiring Union Bank, RBC acquiring HSBC. We're seeing this consolidation in the industry. So 5 years from now, what do you think the branch network is going to look like? Is it going to be the same as we have today? What is it going to look like?
Well, first of all, nothing's going to be static. It's not going to look the same as it is today. But I do think that you're going to have this hybrid type of movement going forward where folks are investing in physical, but they're also investing in digital, and the digital is going to make what the physical looks like continue to morph, right? So that's part of the scenario. But look, one of the things we haven't talked about so far is this whole notion of AI and conversational AI and what impact that is going to have, right? Because when we go forward, conversational AI is going to make it possible for customers to interact with our digital assets different than they do today, right? And as they are able to do that better, as those digital assets become smarter, there are some things that they have been, interactions that they've been having with people that they will be comfortable doing in a digital type environment. Look, let me give an illustration of something. If you're a Mac user, you tend to know everything where your Mac is, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you're a Windows user, things behave a certain way, and you know how those things behave, right? If you're primarily do one versus the other, whenever you make a change, you're a little bit lost because you don't know where to find things. You don't know what you need to do to make things react, right? So I bring that up because when somebody goes to banking apps, every banking app is its own thing, right? They don't necessarily all have the same interface where you find things in the same places and all those kinds of things. And so one of the biggest issues has been discoverability, like I was saying, that you don't know what all you can do. But now, as you have conversational AI and folks are able to basically talk to their apps, and some of them already have virtual assistants in them. The virtual assistants may not have that many features, but over time, the number of features is going to grow, and it's going to grow exponentially. It's going to grow fast, right? And so people will be able to talk to their apps. They'll be able to do discoverability in their apps, or at ATMs, even online. I mean, all of these digital assets are going to have a whole new set of capabilities, right? And so what that's going to mean is that with all of those new capabilities that those digital assets are going to have, the kinds of things that the people will be doing will be those more complex, those more complicated, those more intimate, types of scenarios, right? That's what they're going to be focused on. So some of the things that folks are doing today at Windows, at transaction windows, are going to, scale back. And so you may see, footprints that are significantly different in terms of transaction windows and those kinds of things, but much more in terms of meeting spaces. You may come into a branch and see a lot of people engaged in deep conversation and stuff like that. Nothing going on at transaction windows because there's not much to do there anymore. But I think that's how we're going to see things evolve, because you're going to have um, you know, all of these new capabilities that folks are going to be able to interact with their, the digital assets, and that includes IVRs, by the way. I
Mm.
mean, we're going to see a whole new set of smart IVRs that people can interact with. That, the whole landscape is going to change in terms of those types of things.
Yeah, it will definitely challenge some of the current paradigms that we have. Before
Mhm.
we close it up, if you want to use your chat bubble and ask us any questions, ask Robert and myself any questions, please feel free to do so as we wrap this up. Just want to capture if you had any questions. We're going to be sharing this video podcast in addition to the research studies that we are referring to. One was on ROI, the other one's on seamless banking and the impact of branch closures. So look forward to sharing those with you via an email. I'm just going to see here if there's any questions. No? Okay, well,
Doesn't look
thank
like
you
we
very
have any
much.
so far. Oh, wait
Yeah.
a minute. Let's see
Marbue,
something.
thank you very much for your time, and look forward to catching up with you at the BCX conference in Charlotte in September.
Well, certainly look forward to catching up with you there as well, JP. And I've enjoyed our conversation. I hope the folks that joined us have enjoyed it as well, and they've gotten a lot of takeaways from it. And hey, we should do this again sometime. But if not in between now and then, looking forward to the BCX conference in Charlotte in September.
Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining, everyone. Bye now.